Well, great. Well, if you, Jillian, if you end up coming to visit the UW, you'll have to let me know.
I will, for sure.
And there are some other schools around here, so you'll have to look at the whole Washington list. I mean, and let me know.
Our summer. That's on our summer list.
Yeah, that's a good idea to visit in the summer for sure. For sure. But hopefully things will look a lot more normal by summer.
I hope so.
I know. We're all ready. That's
yeah.
right.
So
okay,
ready.
Dan, why don't you go ahead and get started there?
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to tonight's event here presented by University Bookstore. We are excited to present Jillian Cantor to celebrate her new book, Beautiful Little Fools. She'll be in conversation tonight with Elise Hooper. University Bookstore is excited to present author Jillian Cantor on her virtual tool for Beautiful Little Fools. Let me just tell you a little bit about her. She has a BA in English from Penn State University and an MFA from the University of Arizona, where she is calling from tonight, and is the author of numerous award-winning and best-selling novels for teens and adults, including The Hours Count, Count Margot, The Lost Letter, In Another Time, and Half-Life. She will be in conversation with Elise Hooper, who spent several years writing for television and online news outlets before getting an MA and teaching high school literature and history. And she also has a new book coming out in the next few weeks, which we'll be touching upon. Just a few more things before I turn it over to the ladies. This event is being recorded and will be on University Bookstore's YouTube channel, and usually it takes about 2 to 3 days, sometimes a little bit longer, but if you enjoy the event and you know someone who wasn't able to make it tonight and might enjoy it, just let them know about it and keep an eye on our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions for the speakers, please put them in the Q&A tab at the bottom, and we'll get to those questions during the event. Don't use the chat. It kind of moves too quickly and we end up losing the thought, so try and use the Q&A tab there at the bottom. And now I will turn things over to Jillian and Elise.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is so great. Hello, Jillian.
Hi.
Welcome to Seattle.
I know. I wish I were there in person.
I know. Or that we could move. Is it sunny in Arizona these days? I mean, I know it's evening there now.
It's been like on and off. It was sunny today and like in the 70s. And then tomorrow's supposed to be in the 40s and raining. So we're just like all over the place right now.
I mean, I feel like that's everyone. I just walked outside and there are daffodils in bloom here. And I mean, yeah, so the weather is variable day to day, I guess, no matter where we are. Well, that makes me feel better then, that I'm not imagining, you're out sitting by the pool and every day enjoying the weather.
I'm not.
Yeah, the cooler weather gives you good time to write. So I do always feel like that's an advantage here in Seattle, is it's a real writer's climate for sure.
Good coffee, like you need that coffee to write, right?
Right. Well, congratulations on your new book that I'm holding up here. Gorgeous. Yes, it's so beautiful. I was saying actually before we officially started, did you have any say in this cover? I feel like readers always want to know cover story.
Yeah, I know. Everyone's been asking me that, and I really didn't. I mean, I can't take any credit for the cover. I think that they did ask me to like send some covers that I liked, or if I had any ideas. And I'm really not a visual artist, so I couldn't have imagined this even if I had tried. And I think we did talk about like the Art Deco style, the black and gold a little bit. But I really had no input in the cover. They sent it to me and they were like, what do you think of this? And I loved it. And that was the first one I saw. And, I mean, I don't know what it's like for you, but for some of my other books, I have seen some covers that I haven't liked.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, what do you think of the cover? And then I have to be like, do you have any other options? Or, we'll talk about it. But this was the first one I saw. I loved it. Everyone loved it. So they did an amazing job, but I can't take any credit for it. So people are saying to me, like, you did such a good job with the cover. And it's like, I didn't do the cover, but I agree.
No, it really is beautiful. It's really striking. I'll bet it really pops on shelves. But let's talk about what's inside the cover, because that is what you had your hands all over. This is a novel, everyone, that I read, and it's really stuck with me. I mean, I only read it a few weeks ago, but it really, I am a great Gatsby fan. And this I felt like really expanded the story in so many wonderful ways. So I would love to know where this idea even came from. Tell me about how this came to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a huge Great Gatsby fan also. I read The Great Gatsby so many times. I read it in high school for the first time and loved it. I read it again in college. I kept my college copy. I just showed you before we started. I kept my college copy, moved it with me across the country, and I would just kind of come back to it every year or two and read it again. And initially, I really just loved it as a reader. I love F. Scott Fitzgerald's writing. I love the story that it's like just the slice of American life, but there's, drama and murder and affairs. And then I also started to love it as a writer. I think, once I started writing myself, the fact that F. Scott Fitzgerald chooses to narrate the original from Nick's point of view, and Nick is like this outsider to the group, and he just has a much different perspective, I think, than anyone in it. And I was always fascinated by that choice as a writer. But every time I read it, I would always think about Daisy and Jordan, who are kind of the two primary women in the book. And Daisy especially is so involved in the plot. The entire plot of the novel revolves around Daisy, but she barely speaks. And when she does, she doesn't really say what's on her mind. So I would always wonder about what Daisy was thinking and feeling like there was more to the surface. And, I kind of always had the idea in the back of my mind, oh, it'd be really great to tell Daisy's story. And I said it to a friend of mine a few years ago. I have a really good friend who's a writer who lives nearby. And, in pre-pandemic times, we would go to lunch once a month and just kind of toss around story ideas. And one time we went to lunch and I was like, I really want to rewrite Gatsby from Daisy's point of view. And she was like, you have to do this book. She would not let me leave lunch until I promised her that I would write this book. And so I was like, well, someday I will. And then I think it was the next day, I saw there was an article in USA Today, and it was talking about how the copyright of Gatsby would be expiring in January of 2021. This was probably December 2019 at that time. And so I was like, okay, maybe this is the right time to write this story right now. And then I sort of went from there.
Wow. So I actually was tempted as I was reading your book to kind of keep going to the original Gatsby, Great Gatsby, to kind of check on details.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was decided purposely not to. I wanted this one to kind of live fully on its own. But what I guess the reason that I was so pulled to go to the original was because these characters are so real that you've built. I mean, their backstories. And what I really wanted to go and look at was there sort of a breadcrumb trail almost that Fitzgerald set up of who these women were, or did you just fully imagine this? I mean, I remember a few things the golf. I remember some of these things, but you have created just such a rich new world. So tell me how you did that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he did create a breadcrumb trail, but also I did invent stuff. So I think it's a combination of both. And, it started with really doing a careful rereading of the original and just taking notes on every line and sort of analyzing every line of dialogue. And he told us a lot about the women and what they were doing in the years leading up to the original Great Gatsby. The original Great Gatsby just takes place over 3 months in the summer of 1922. But we know where the women are from 1917 through 1922, even if it's just briefly mentioned. So I was able to sort of take their timeline from what was in the book. And then, just there's little lines of dialogue here and there that it really helped me expand their character. You mentioned the golf. Yeah, Jordan is a golfer. And they mentioned that there was a scandal that she had been cheating on the tour. But then it got worked out. They didn't really know how. And so, that definitely plays a big role in my book. And just little lines of dialogue here and there. And there's one in particular that I always think of when they're at the scene at the plaza near the end of the Great Gatsby. They're all drinking. It's super hot. And all of a sudden they start talking about Daisy and Tom's wedding. And Jordan talks about this guy who fainted. And she has one line of dialogue where she says, we carried him down to my house because I just lived 2 doors down. He stayed for 3 weeks until Daddy kicked him out, and then Daddy died the next day. And then they just move on with their conversation. But I was there's so much there. She has this father who died 3 weeks after Daisy's wedding. And this man, like strangers stayed with him for 3 weeks. The father kicked him out and then he died the next day. So I was like, what happened? Something happened. And that does become sort of like a key scene for Jordan in my book. So I would say like that, the breadcrumbs were definitely there and I expanded on them. And there are lots of other little things like that. We learn in the original that Tom cheats on Daisy on their honeymoon. So we get to see that scene. We learn how Daisy reacts when her daughter was born and we get to see that scene. We know that Jordan visited Tom and Daisy in France and we see her go there. And, we know that they lived in Chicago before they went to East Egg and they had to leave because Tom had a little spree. So we get to see what that is. So I did expand on a lot of what was in The Great Gatsby, but then I made some stuff up too. I gave Daisy a younger sister in my book, and we don't know anything about her family in The Great Gatsby. So that's my invention. Myrtle has a younger sister, Catherine, who's one of my point of view characters, but she's only mentioned twice in the original Great Gatsby. We see her in like 2 short scenes. So all we really know is that she's younger, she has a red bob, and she sort of lies at the end of the book. When she's identifying Myrtle's body, they ask her if Myrtle was involved in anything fishy, and she says no, and she lies. And so it was all I knew about her. So she's mostly invented. I make her a suffragette, and she's really fighting for women's rights. And that was a lot of me. But so it was a combination, but it definitely originated with, what I found in the original text.
That's amazing. I don't remember. All I really remember off the top of my head, it's been a few years since I've read I used to teach it in high school, I was saying, is the golf details. The rest of it, that's a good reminder to me. But I really just couldn't get over how authentic it felt. Like a few times I thought, I need to go do some research and see. And then I thought, no, I think this is all Jillian's imagination. Like these aren't real people. I was really immersed in the story.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, no, but it was, that's what I have tried to impart on a few readers I've talked to about this book, is it's just it really opens up the story in so many great ways. So kudos to you on that.
Yeah.
Had you studied any other, that's kind of, I feel like a thing these days, right? Is to sort of reimagine classics and kind of, did you look at any others to kind of see how other people structured this?
I've definitely, I have read retellings and I enjoy them personally, but I didn't look at anything when I started writing this. I wasn't really modeling it after anything.
Right.
I knew right away that it was going to be a murder mystery. The original Great Gatsby, near the end, Jay Gatsby shot and killed, and they don't really investigate it too much. They kind of just wrap up the case. But I just instantly was like, this is going to be a murder mystery, and I'm going to have a detective, and it's going to be sort of structured around his investigation. So I don't know why I came to that, but I did. I just knew that detail right away.
Have an instinct.
But I love retellings in general, and I especially love thinking about things from a different point of view. And I think I just love that in writing in general, whether it's a retelling or just a story. I love to see how different characters look at the same thing, and it looks completely different, just sort of based on who they are and their gaze. So I'm sort of always drawn to stories multiple narrators, I think. But yeah, I didn't really look at a specific retelling.
Yeah. Then the detective who you just mentioned, he is the sole male voice in the book. So tell me why you felt that was important.
Yeah, so the detective is really the only one that doesn't originate from the original story. And he's a detective who finds a diamond hairpin at the scene of Gatsby's murder and becomes convinced one of 3 women is responsible for his death. And he, gets hired to investigate it. And I wanted to make it a mystery. So part of it was for plot, I wanted to show these women over 5-6 years, but I wanted something to move the story forward. So I think what does that is the detective sort of comes in little interludes, and he's investigating and he's questioning them in the future. And then you sort of see the past. But also I wanted there to be one male voice that sort of balanced Tom and Gatsby and Nick and George Wilson, who are not the nicest men. And we know that from the original Gatsby. But I felt like I wanted to have one male voice who was kind of a nice guy, His whole world revolves around his wife, and she's also, you know, he listens to her for advice all the time also, and he's definitely like very respectful of women. So I wanted to have this like one nice man to sort of counterbalance all these sort of awful men that I was pulling from The Great Gatsby.
Well, I was kind of happy to see Nick demoted in this story. For some reason, Nick never, he always stuck in my craw a little bit in the original. So I was kind of glad. I mean, he has, for having really presenting us the story in the first one, you've absolutely pushed him to the bottom of your story.
I know. And I think like Jordan calls him milk toast at one point, and I almost felt a little bad for him, but he, I mean, I agree after rereading it so many times. Like, I love the choices of writer that Fitzgerald made to put the story in Nick's voice.
Yeah.
And then also like Nick has always been one of my least favorite characters in The Great Gatsby. So I do agree with that.
Yeah. And you kind of gracefully get around sort of, I thought the question, I mean, the big question with Gatsby is always, you know, how does he go from this to that, right? Does he become a legend? And you do a really nice job of not really nailing down exactly that. You leave that mystery in place, which I thought was really clever. I don't think I'm giving anything away to read.
Yeah, no, you're not. I mean, definitely, because I don't have his point of view. And so it's like, I don't think that Daisy and Jordan and Catherine would know any more than Nick about how he got to where he was.
Right. So did you have a buy, first of all, and we won't talk about really how it resolves, but did you know how this story was going to resolve as you started it?
I did. I made an outline, which I don't normally do. You know, the like age old question for writers is, are you a pantser or a plotter? And I always say that I'm a pantser because I just sort of fly by the seat of my pants and figure out the plot. But for this book, I was a plotter. So I learned that I actually can do that, which was amazing. I'll probably never be able to do it again. But for this book, I did make a really big outline before I started. And I think because I wanted to keep it consistent with everything from the initial Gatsby, I started making a timeline. And then once I was making a timeline, it ended up with like a chapter by chapter outline. And then I had the whole book outline. So I did know how the murder of Gatsby resolved. However, I turned my first draft into my editor and she read it and she was like, you're missing the last chapter. And I was like, no, this is how it ends in my outline. But she was like, no, that's not the end. And so I kind of had to like step back and I talked it through with her and realized she was right. So I did add a chapter after she read that first draft, which was not in my outline. It like wraps the book up. So I did know like how the plot resolved, but I did not actually have that last chapter, which is from Daisy's point of view.
Yeah. Okay. That's right.
That was not in the first draft or my outline.
So you ended the original one with the detective then, is that right?
Yes, the detective. Yeah.
Well, I like how you give Daisy then the last word for sure.
Yeah, I think that was the right thing to do. And I like it better this way, but I was like so stuck to my outline that I was like, no, I have written every chapter in my outline. That is the end.
Well, this is impressive to me because I'm kind of a hybrid of that pantster and plotter, but I am always writing outlines and then completely going rogue on my outline and then reworking my outline and then changing. So I'm very impressed to hear that you created an outline and you stuck with it so much so that then you even had a discussion with your editor. We'll call it a discussion, not an argument about how to end the book. I think
it was because I was trying to stick to this timeline. You know, I knew where every character had to be in each chapter because we were told that in The Great Gatsby. And so I didn't want to veer from that. And then there were like certain lines of dialogue that I knew had to come in certain places and I had to fit them into the plot. So I don't know that I could do it for a book that wasn't a retelling like this. In fact, I can tell you that. I can't.
So have you, I have a little bit of experience in retellings. My first book, The Other Alcott, is, taking this sort of beloved classic. And, there were people who objected kind of to the Louisa May Alcott I portray in that story. Yeah. And have you encountered any of that? People get really precious about fictional characters. And the tricky thing, of course, about Little Women is that it's a fictional story, but based on real people. So there's a little bit of a double jeopardy there. But have you run into people who have had strong feelings about?
Yeah, so far I have not. Like people have responded really well, and it's been good so far. But the question that people keep asking me that's related to this was if I was like really nervous when I was writing this book to retell a classic and worrying about like how people would react. And the thing was, when I was writing it, I wasn't thinking about that. I just was so excited to write the story. And it was the story that I always wanted to write. And I feel like I wrote the book that I personally wanted to read. So I just had so much fun. I was writing it, wasn't thinking about it at all. And then of course, like I finished the book and, we started to talk about marketing. And then all of a sudden that hit me like people were going to read it. And I was like, oh yeah, maybe I am nervous about this now, but it was too late by that point, of course. But so far the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive, and I am sure, and I do expect that some people will like just take objection just because it's different than what we've always known. But I kind of find that true with all of my books. There's sort of always something that people will love and people will hate, and I feel like I just have to like write the best book that I can and the book that I want to read and be happy with it and try to tune some of that out.
Yeah, no, I think you're so right there. I mean, you're never going to satisfy everyone. So I think that's great. I so admire that you were able to kind of quiet all those critics in your head.
I think it's just because I didn't think about it. Like it didn't occur to me to think about it. If I had, I don't know that I would have been able to write the book.
Well, yeah. So that's the reason we sort of try to quiet all those voices. I found, especially when I was writing The Other Alcott, I wrote a lot of that book at 5 a.m. And I would tell well, first of all, that was a very practical time I could write, but also the sort of my inner critic was still sort of asleep, I felt.
You didn't caffeinate your inner critic.
Right. So I like that your critics just stayed quiet the whole time. That's good. Your inner critic.
Until the book was done. And then the critic came out of full force.
Sure. That's always going to happen with everyone, right? You finish something and you're so excited about it. And then all of a sudden there's the realization of, oh my gosh, this needs to out in the world. But this has been an overwhelmingly well-received book. I mean, it was an indie next. I mean, we can really go through all the laurels. You got Oprah even to mention it, didn't you? So,
yeah.
I mean, I think people, without even realizing what they were hungry for, having a retelling of this really iconic American story has really sort of struck people just in the right way. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, it's great. Were there any surprises to you as you were working on this book?
Well, I mean, the ending obviously was a surprise because I thought that I needed a final chapter. And, actually I was asked this question in an interview, that I was answering in December, and I couldn't think of an answer. And I think I said well, this is my 11th book, not that much surprises me anymore. And then literally right after I finished that interview, my editor called and told me that they had to push my pub date back a month. Right. So that was surprising because that has never happened to me before. And it was because of all the printing issues. The first editions of the books that they had printed, the spines were cracked, and they didn't realize until the middle of December, and the book was supposed to come out January 4th. So they had to start over with the printing, and there's paper shortage and warehouse shortage, everything shortage. And so they had to push the book back. So 2 weeks before it was supposed to come out, it got pushed from January 4th to February 1st, which was a huge surprise. And I can say that's never happened to me in 11 books. And I hope it doesn't happen again. I don't know. So that was probably just the most surprising thing about the process. And then sort of, because how it is as an author, it's this date that your book's supposed to come out, and it a year in advance, and everything's leading up to it, and it takes so long to do all the marketing and publicity. And then it was 2 weeks before it just changed. It was kind of shocking. So yeah, that was my surprise about the process. I think surprise about writing the book was how much I liked Jordan. I mean, I always liked Jordan as a character, but she was just the one that I just loved writing, I think, more than anything else, and had such a great time with her. And I almost didn't include her. Initially I was oh, this will just be a story about Daisy. But then I thought, well, Jordan could be interesting too. And then of course I added Catherine, but Jordan, her voice really took off for me.
I loved the Jordan chapters. I really did. I mean, I love them all, but Jordan was someone who she is, I guess, really that character who all of a sudden kind of rose out of, she had just been sort of a peripheral figure to me. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone, I feel like Daisy Buchanan is sort of she has that sort of cultural significance, right? But Daisy, or Jordan rather, kind of came out of, I'm trying to come up with a golf, because I was about to say left field, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I should come up with a golfing pun, but I can't.
Metaphor.
But I loved that. I thought that was really well done. Of course, also my background in Fast Girls had me sort of applauding. I love any early athlete. I love the depiction of that, because I am hoping that sort of surprises people to read that there were women playing, on I mean, that was an early Olympic golf event. Golf was.
Yeah. And I mean, that wasn't the original Great Gatsby. She is a golfer, which is what kind of drew me into her, because it's like, she had this like career, which women didn't really even have a career at the time, much less one that was like an athletic career. And that, that was her in the Great Gatsby. And so I really wanted to get into that a little bit.
Yeah, that was great. So with research, I mean, clearly you had to dive into the original text.
Mm-hmm.
What else did you have to do to figure? I mean, I was impressed they went to Fiji, to be honest. On a honeymoon.
I know, well, that is actually in the original Great Gatsby.
Wow, that's such a long trip for I mean, I guess they went by ship, right? And they
did like he said 2-month honeymoon in the South Pacific. Then they ended up in Hawaii, which they have like one line where they mention later where Tom says something to her about, Daisy says to Tom, I never loved you. And he said, not even in Kapiolani. And so I was like, well, I have to show what happened in Kapiolani. So we have that scene. And then they went to Santa Barbara, where Jordan, was there. They met Jordan, and then Tom cheats on her at the end of their 2-month honeymoon. So all of that was from the original. But in terms of research, it was a lot of just like figuring out what the places would look like at that time. We knew Daisy grew up in Louisville and Jordan grew up down the street. So I wanted to figure out what neighborhood she would have been in and what her house would have looked like, and, like what area of town she would have walked through. So it's just kind of like looking all of that up and looking at a lot of pictures online and, like figuring out what else was going on in the world at that time. And I really went down like a big research rabbit hole about the 1918-1919 pandemic, because of course I'm writing this book during our pandemic.
Yep.
And, when I sold the book, actually, I sold it just on the first 50 pages in my outline, and it was before the pandemic. And I didn't think about the pandemic, the flu pandemic at all. And then as soon as I like went back to writing it in like March, April, 2020, I realized, wait, they're living through their own pandemic. Like, how does this impact them? So I went down this huge research, like rabbit hole, mapping out the whole pandemic, which came in these waves. And none of the months that my book was taking place in overlapped with any of the pandemic waves in Louisville. And so I was like trying to figure out for the longest time how to get it into my book. And then I finally realized that Daisy and Jordan probably wouldn't have paid that much attention to the pandemic. It wasn't affecting them. And then I did add a line where Jordan talks about how some of her golf tournaments got delayed because of the flu. But I think I spent like a week like reading about this pandemic. And I also feel like it gave me like a deeper understanding of the Roaring 20s and just, why they had such a sense of celebration. It was like World War I was over, their pandemic was over, of course they were going to be having these parties. And so that sort of helped me understand that time too. The other thing I did for research, was I also read this book, which is Careless People. And it talks about the real murder that Fitzgerald might have based Myrtle's murder on. But it had just a lot of really good information about like New York City at the time and what women were wearing and, like what things look like. And so I was able to get some details from there too.
No, that's great, because there are so many small details in this that really make it feel so authentic. I was so charmed by that. I'm also, just quick shout out, very impressed that you only feel like you spent 1 week on, down a rabbit hole that didn't end up making it the book. Cause I just
1 week down that rabbit hole.
Okay.
There were others.
Were there? Okay. That is comforting, because I often feel like the most inefficient writer and researcher on the planet, because I sometimes, like you, really want to work something in and I'm shoehorning, it just doesn't work and I have to toss it. Or I put in all this effort, I write all this stuff, and then only to kind of find it doesn't really work with the story. So did you have any others like that?
I did actually spend a really long time trying to figure out like what house Daisy lived in Louisville. And then like they go on a bunch of train trips. So I was like mapping all the trains. And then like I had one and then I ended up cutting the scene, I think. And then there's a one little section actually where Daisy talks about the year she was born and like what was going on in Louisville. And I spent an inordinate amount of time like learning about what was going on in 1899 in Louisville. And I think it's like one sentence in the book. So yeah, I always find myself going down these little rabbit holes and then thinking, well, how can I put this in the book? It's so interesting. Right. And most of it doesn't make it into the book.
I know. Well, the real estate also feels very authentic. I mean, did you have you had clearly, it sounds like real houses in mind as you were writing these? Because I mean, I felt like, okay, this is, again, you're taking a fictional world and fictionalizing it again, but it started to really, the fictional one started to feel very real.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff in like East Egg and West Egg is very thoroughly described in The Great Gatsby. So I was definitely taking those descriptions, but yeah, like their Chicago house, the Louisville houses, I was looking at a lot of pictures online and I did have specific houses in mind.
Yeah, it comes through. I mean, really the level of detail, well, certainly it doesn't overwhelm you as the reader. I mean, it just really instills a sense of confidence that, I felt like I was in the hands of someone who really knew this story through and through. The tellers, the details, the world, everything. So, I mean, I've talked about how much I enjoyed this, but again, another plug.
Thank you.
Yeah. So tell me about, let's see here. I actually am just looking. Okay, wait. I have a little list of notes and I've actually run through a few of those that I didn't think I had. So any other things that you would want people to know that went into writing this story?
I mean, I think I would just say one thing, like we've been talking about The Great Gatsby a lot, and obviously it's a reimagining, of the women in The Great Gatsby, but I don't actually think you have to have read The Great Gatsby to, read this book or enjoy this book at all. It's very much also just like a mystery, a murder mystery, and sort of a reimagining of this historical time for these three women kind of going through something. And so I think you could definitely just like read it for that. If you do know Gatsby, for sure you will recognize like little lines or little things, but I don't think that you do have to know Gatsby.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Or remember Gatsby. I think a lot of us like read it in high school and haven't read it again. And I think that's definitely enough too.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I said how I meant to then go back and reread it and then decided, I kind of liked that I just had your book straight in my head and I almost didn't want to kind of start parsing down to, a really granular level because these voices did feel really distinct. And I think that was a really smart move by you. I mean, no one wants to sort of be upright against, an F. Scott Fitzgerald, let's say. So you're so smart about this retelling. It's really, I think people will be very surprised and entertained by this world that you've built.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the women. Did you have a fate? Well, so you said Jordan was kind of someone you really flipped into that. What about Daisy? Was that sort of a revelation to you too, to work on her?
Yeah, I mean, I think Daisy comes off pretty unsympathetic in the original, and I always felt like there was more to her, and I, really wanted to figure out like how to make her more complex in my retelling, where like maybe she does do some unsympathetic things, but I also felt like maybe she had a lot going on in the interior space. So one way I did that was by giving her a sister, and her sister really like becomes a big part of her story. And then of course, Catherine is Myrtle's sister. So there's a lot about like sisters, biological sisters, but like sisters and friendship as well. So that like, once I figured out that Daisy had a sister, that helped me with her character a lot, even some of the choices she made in Gatsby. I felt like she had some more motivation that I could understand.
And with the ambiguity around Gatsby himself, which again, I would say is very much preserved in a great way in your book, did you feel like you had any revelations about him as you were working on the book?
Yeah, I think when I first read the book in high school, I thought it was like a love story. And that was sort of how it stuck in my mind. And then when I reread it again as an adult, I did not see it as a love story at all. And then when I really started thinking about doing a retelling, I just kept thinking about the fact that Daisy and Gatsby dated in 1917, and then 5 years later, she moves into this new house on Long Island. He deliberately buys the house directly across the sound from her and is staring at her, dock and her green light and throwing parties. And he's very aggressively in her face. And it just felt like, Nick tells us it's love. In Nick's eyes, everything Gatsby's doing is so romantic, and he has these rose-colored glasses about Gatsby. But I just thought, well, from Daisy's point of view, it feels like he's stalking her. How would you feel being a woman in this position? And so I definitely saw his actions differently when I was thinking about it through this woman's eyes.
Yeah.
And even there's sort of romantic scenes in The Great Gatsby, which when I read it as a teenager, I thought oh, this is so sweet. This is this sort of Romeo and Juliet type love story. When I read them again and thought about them from Daisy's point of view, he's very aggressive with her to the point where it made me feel uncomfortable as a woman. And so I think looking at him through different eyes, made me see him differently too.
Yeah, I think that's really, I think as a culture right now, we're going through a bit of a reckoning, clearly.
Yeah.
Where we're revisiting songs, movies, books, and kind of seeing things we haven't seen in all kinds of ways. And this is a great example of that, because I totally got that impression also as I was reading this, of all the things that we're led to see as charming. And again, I haven't reread The Great Gatsby anytime recently, but I could see being much more off-putting in your book, in a way that is really intriguing. It really, there are several other books now I've read as an adult, that I've really had a completely different takeaway than I did as a kid. The Little House books, when I was reading those to my girls when they were little, all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh my gosh, those really shocked me kind of as an adult.
I haven't reread them. That's really interesting.
That's right, because you have boys.
Yeah.
But just what Pa puts them through is kind of shocking to read again as an adult, as with your own small children sitting there. So it is really an interesting exercise, I think, sometimes to go back and look at these things and see how our perspectives have changed so much.
And just to think about how the same story that we know in The Great Gatsby would be so much different from the female perspective than it is from the male perspective.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so I see we're being told to hit some questions in the Q&A. Let's see. Okay, Carol, I got to your question right away. Oh, Anissa has a good one. As writers of historical fiction, how do you decide how much fact, how much fiction goes into each book? You've talked about that a little, because you are sort of beholden a little bit to the original. Sorry if you can hear my dog.
Oh, it's okay. Mine's right behind me. She's going to start.
Just always keeping things real on Zoom. So you were down to the original, but any other ways you make these choices? And this can refer back to your other books, because because Margot gets into a real character.
Beautiful Little Fools is all fiction, although I kept thinking of the original as the real story, and then mine was a fictional, and I've caught myself a few times saying oh, the real Daisy, and then I have to correct myself and be the original fictional Daisy, because she was not a real person. But I definitely have written books about real people, like you said, Margot. My last book was actually about Marie Curie. So I think for me, and I would be curious to hear your answer to this too, I'm always thinking about the story first, and wanting the book to be a good book and have, plot and pacing and characters. And so usually I figure out that sort of story arc, and that comes before the factual stuff for me. It's I have to know some factual stuff to figure out that story arc. But then I want the book to just read as a good story, more than I want to get certain facts in, I think.
Yeah. I've definitely, I kind of treat it the same way. I often you do sort of that research up front to kind of understand
Yeah.
your who, what, when, where, how. I usually have kind of a timeline that I make, especially if I'm writing, you know, my like Dorothea Lange book or Fast Girl, you know, I need to know those
Right.
character, like
You've
those,
written about a lot of real people.
I have, yeah. And then, yeah, I write a really just sort of rough draft that's just kind of the story as I imagine it, characters, that person's journey. And then I sort of go back in and then kind of like, okay, you know, figure out some of those logistical details. And it is tricky. It can be a fine line, but I think, yeah, we always want to do right by our characters. It is a little tricky though, you're right, when they are real figures, like in Margot, for example, or Madame Curie. I mean, your Marie Curie book, same thing. And the hours too. I mean, you have real people at the heart of a bunch of your recent books too.
I do, yeah. And I feel like that's a lot more stressful. Like you know, because then I feel very bound to get everything right and to also tell a good story. But you know, I don't want to mess up anything if it's about a real person. So I have to say, like, pure fiction, which Beautiful Little Fools was, I find that a lot more freeing. Every time I write about a real person, I swear I'm never going to do it again. And then I get another idea and it's like, well, maybe I'll do it one more time.
I know, it is hard. I've also kind of found you want to do right, but you know, in the case of Fast Girls, which you read and you were generous to blurb for me, I had families of those people still around.
Yeah. I mean, with real people, I think about that too.
Yeah, there are kind of other stakeholders in the story that you want to do right by. So it can be a very tangled web, really, that gets woven.
Yeah, and just like this fine line between like wanting this fiction to be great and then also wanting to stay true to, you know, the real people and their living families too.
Right, absolutely. Let's see if we have any more questions in there. Oh, this is a good one. Is there a story that you would want to write, but maybe find it too daunting? I mean, you proved that you did it.
I know. I think like my problem is I don't worry about how daunting it is until it's too late. And then it's like, what have I gotten myself into?
Right. Yeah, well, I love that you're keeping those voices quiet. There was a second part of that of what are you working on next?
I can't really say too much about it, but it's sort of another feminist reimagining of a different classic. And hopefully I'll be able to talk about it more soon, but that's all I can say. And I think this would be a good place for you to tell us about your new book, which comes out in like 3 weeks, I think, March 8th.
It does. It comes out. I know. I'm a little in denial of the calendar right now. I have Angels of the Pacific, my new book. And this is when let me shut the door here. I don't think this is going to do a whole lot. We'll still hear my dog barking, but it helps a little.
Mine is like quietly sleeping behind me. I'm pretending like she's well behaved.
Well, my house there's people coming and going right now as kids are coming home from practices and things like that. But this new book of mine is my first all fictional character story. It's based on these real women who are known as the Angels of Batan, who were these U.S. and Army and Navy nurses who end up in the Philippines as World War II breaks out, in the Pacific as the U.S. enters it, and they are on the front lines of a war for about 7 months until the U.S. essentially, the government tells them, you know, we're going to go win the war in Europe first, and then we'll come back for you in the Pacific. So just hang tight. And really then what happened to all those people in the Pacific? So in the Philippines specifically, most of the Americans there were put in prisoner of war camps. So this is a story about resilience and hope. And it was very liberating to create. I mean, there are these real women who are the Angels of Batan, but I didn't tell this story like as a jumping off point from any of their specific lives. I was kind of working from there were so many commonalities between these women. Most of them were farm girls who had grown up during the 30s here in the US, and they wanted to get off the farm and maybe even travel. And so they went to nursing school because that was cheaper than college. And then they signed up for the Army or Navy and were sent to all these posts overseas. So there was sort of enough in common where I was able to then create my own fictional characters. And it was very liberating to not feel totally beholden to someone else's storyline, that I could really use my imagination to fill these.
So you took the like real situation and this like really interesting thing that happened, but you have your own fictional characters in it, which is my favorite kind of story to write and to read. So I can't wait to read it. I'm super excited.
Yeah, no, it was really fun in so many ways. I mean, and this is a story, when you talk about outlines, I wrote sort of that for, an early draft, and then realized I was missing, because they do end up in this prison camp, I was missing kind of the whole story of what's happening outside the camp. So I added in, I emailed my editor who was on vacation. I was like, hey, I'm thinking about adding a character who will be a Filipino, outside of the camp, but helping the nurses inside the camps, which is actually very historically accurate. And she was like, go for it. We'll talk about it when I'm home. But yeah, definitely start. I thought, okay, this is nice. This is what happens when you've written a few books already with your editor. So she had a good measure of confidence.
And she answered you on vacation, so she was clearly excited about it.
I know. So yeah, I'm excited about this book. I've had a few friends ask, was it hard to be writing? It's one thing, of course, to be writing about kind of heiresses and things like that during a grim period. It was kind of another to be writing about war, but I actually found I took such comfort in these women, and sort of that they all overcame such a hard situation. There was a lot of perspective in there for me, as I was writing, even sort of during the deepest, darkest periods of lockdown. I was like, well, I can still get up and go to the fridge and take out a bottle of wine or put on Netflix and watch some, whereas life was so much harder.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know. I really got lost in Daisy and Jordan and the Roaring 20s, and like felt like that sort of saved me in the spring of 2020 when I was writing these women. But yeah, that's interesting about perspective.
Yeah, I needed it because we were just in that period where things felt so grim. So to remind myself that people of the world have had it a lot harder, and they've made it through to the other side. I took a lot of solace in that. Let's say that really was a relief, because the last couple of years have been challenging, and so that was really useful for me at that point. But did you go to Louisville? I was just thinking, because I actually was able to travel to the Philippines to do some research on this. You did. I was wondering.
No, I didn't go to Louisville, but I remember when you went to the Philippines, because it was like right before the lockdown, right? Like, and you were posting pictures. You like just got in there.
I just got in there. I know. There were a lot of crazy things about that trip, but it did all work out. But I wonder.
I didn't go anywhere. I wrote this book in like March, April, May, and June of 2020, and barely left my house when I did it. So I was only going there on the internet. I have been to some of the locations in the book before, but yeah, no, I didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on right now is kind of a project truly of the pandemic, where I don't go anywhere. So, and I've just this world is being built in my imagination. And I think there's something very liberating about that too. I mean, I've always looked at writing novels as a wonderful way to pick up some new skills, maybe as research, or travel somewhere for research. But I'm kind of learning the whole other side of that, which is also a real, just kind of a fun realization that, our own minds are capable of all kinds of exciting things. I think we all know that as readers, but to kind of get the reminder as a writer is really useful. So have you been reading anything that you would recommend to people? I mean, I know you've been busy promoting this book, but I'm sure people love.
I have. Yeah, I just finished The Overnight Guest by Heather Gudenkauf, which was great. I love all of her books. She's a really good, like, atmospheric thriller writer. And I also just read The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis, which is a historical, like 2 timeline about the Frick Museum, the Frick House. But she does a great job of like including real people, but fictionalizing them, which I always love, which we were just talking about. And then the Liz Taylor Ring by Brenda Janowitz, which also came out February 1st. Really good, like family saga, sibling relationships. So yeah, I loved that.
Yeah, that's great. I love the Magnolia Palace too. That one is for people who love historical fiction. That one is very satisfying. And Brenda's latest book, I actually sent her a message earlier because I was asking, did Elizabeth Taylor really have 2 sets of eyelashes? I mean, that's, I guess, why she had thick eyelashes. Within like the first 3 pages of that book, I learned something new.
I know. And she has like a great author's note at the end where I don't know if you got to the end yet, but she has a great author's note at the end where she kind of like goes through like all the references from like the Liz Taylor movies and her life and like how they popped up in the book. And I had no idea. And I was like, oh my God, she did so much research, because the book itself is like it's not about Liz Taylor. It's about this family, and the parents have this ring that's sort of like Liz Taylor's ring, and then like it's the mystery of what happened to the ring, and all the siblings kind of fighting over it in present day. But there's like so many nods to Liz Taylor when you get to the end. I love the author's note.
I love author's notes.
Yeah. So what else are you reading now?
Well, as I said, I just started that 2 nights ago. There was your book. I'm looking around. Ooh, I just got the new Diane Chamberlain book, which I'm really excited about. I love her books. And let's see. I have the new book that just came out from Heather Webb.
Oh yeah, that one looks really good too. At Ellis Island.
Yes, Ellis Island, which is a fabulous setting for a book, because it's a place, where people are arriving to enter a whole new world, and they're desperate.
Yes.
And, I just, that's what our nation is. That's such an important part of our story, the immigrant story. So I love that she's set a book. I keep sort of saying to people like, yeah, my new book's set in World War II, because I know that people are getting a little tired of World War II. But so that's why Ellis Island was like a very charming new like setting that I feel like not enough people have written about. So yeah, I mean, and I am really looking forward to the new Lucy Foley book that is coming out, The Paris Apartment.
Yeah, that one looks really good too.
Yeah. So lots of really, I mean, this is prime reading weather. I feel like reading season, kind of gray and dark. And so that has been, I always enjoy kind of getting into these new books that are out. And I just saw a new question pop up. So if we have time for one more, let's
do one more.
Okay, Sarah Scott's writing, I notice you seem to use very descriptive imagery, especially color in the book, which is something that always stood out to me from The Great Gatsby. How much, if at all, did you take into consideration Fitzgerald's style of writing? That's a great question. Did you attempt to mirror the style? When we talk about intimidating, there you go.
I know. Yeah. That's a really good question. I didn't attempt to mirror his style just because I felt like the voice in The Great Gatsby was Nick's voice. And the voices in my story were Daisy and Jordan and Catherine. And so I felt their voices like very distinctly from the one we know in The Great Gatsby. But I did, notice a lot of the detail in The Great Gatsby and sort of like moved that into my book. So I think the fact that he used so much color, it was like those were details that I knew, so they made it into my book as well. But like stylistically, I was very much thinking, this is Daisy's voice, and I was not trying to imitate F. Scott Fitzgerald for sure.
Did you fall into a fashion rabbit hole at all on this book? Because
I did. I was looking at a lot of pictures of flappers and like flapper dresses, and yeah, I did. And then actually, we talked in the beginning about the cover, and I think they were like, what suggestions do you have for the cover? And I just kept sending my editor pictures of flappers like over and over again. I was like, look at these flappers, look at these flappers. There's not really a flapper on the cover, but I did like to look at all the images.
I mean, I have recently rewatched Downton Abbey. I'm calling it research. It's questionable if it was really research or if it was just me scratching an itch, but it's, there's some overlap there in time period, and the costumes in that show are so glorious.
Oh, I know.
So I can see how that would be a really easy thing to kind of fall down a rabbit hole on when writing from this era.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was like everything was, especially because I was writing it when I wasn't leaving my house. And so I was like traveling to this other world every day in my mind, which was amazing.
Yeah. Now, has your son, so you have a junior in high school, which is kind of prime time. He's taking American history. I used to teach juniors in high school. That's how I have sort of a forensic knowledge of this. But is he reading The Great Gatsby this year? Do you know?
Yeah, no, he's actually not, because he's taking like AP English language class. And so they read the nonfiction text. I think they do in like the traditional, just English 11. But both of my kids have actually read The Great Gatsby just on their own. They have not read my book yet.
I was just about to ask.
They haven't read it yet, but they have both read The Great Gatsby. And they're like sitting in the other room. So I'm sure they've heard every word I've said like night after night, and they're tired of it, but they have both read The Great Gatsby.
And were they fans?
Yeah, I mean, they both picked it up, on their own. I want to say when they were like 12 or 13, they just kind of like read it over the summer, and they did. They both liked it. They both watched all the movies with me when I was doing my research.
So you watched, the movies. I was going to ask about that too. Yeah. I love the most recent. Is it the most recent one? The one with Leonardo DiCaprio? The one with the famous meme? Yeah. That's what I prefer as over.
It's very visually stunning. And I discovered there was one with Paul Rudd as Nick. I had to order it on DVD. It's not streaming anywhere, but that was a pretty good one too.
Oh, interesting. I mean, Paul Rudd, he pops up everywhere. I
didn't know. Nick.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I could see him making an affable Nick. Sure. Who is the Great Gatsby in that one?
Oh gosh, I don't remember. I'm gonna have to look it up. Only Paul Rudd stood out to me.
He was the standout. Fair enough. Let me see if we have any other questions. I don't see any questions. And then I see some great, all the links for the books we've talked about are here. And now I see Dan popping in. So I don't know if this is our cue to slurp down the last of our gin rickies.
Yeah, well, I think that, what I would do if I was not on the clock and had a gin ricky here. Yeah, I think we could probably wrap things up if no one else has any more questions. So thank you, Jillian and Elise, for spending the evening with us. And a huge thank you to our audience tonight for spending an hour with us, and a great book. You can you may purchase copies of Jillian's Beautiful Little Fools through the University Bookstore website right there on the chat. We have links, and Elise's Angels of the Pacific will hit bookstore shelves on March 8th. Thank you all for joining us, and please check out our website, social media, and sign up for our emails to hear about other upcoming author events. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Congratulations, Jillian.
Oh, thanks. Bye.
Bye.